Hey guys, welcome back to Route 66 Restoration. As you can see, I'm not out in the shop working today. It's 27 degrees out, and so I'm just kind of staying inside here. But today is a important day of history. It's November 10th, and it is the 50th year anniversary of the sinking of the Edmund Fitzgerald. I'm sat here in front of my fireplace, and over my shoulder, like right here, you can see some stones. I brought these from Michigan when we started building this house, and that stone is called a pudding stone, and they're somewhat uncommon, but they're a conglomerate stone, and they got a bunch of different things in them. But I've just sat here. I wanted to tell you a little bit about my memories of what happened the day the Edmund Fitzgerald sank. So, in the beginning, when the fur traders and the native tribes traveled they traveled in birch bark canoes, and this birch bark canoe was actually given to me by a friend of mine who used to sail on the Great Lakes, and he was a chef on a boat, and he made many trips, and he said, "The lake I hate the most is Lake Erie." He says, because Lake Erie instantaneously becomes rough. But when storms come across the area, with the mass of water that's in the Great Lakes, mixed with some bad weather, the weather can get very violent. And so it's a time where anybody in a small craft, they instantaneously put out a small craft advisory. Back in the 70s, in the 60s, and even the 50s, they didn't have anything in place. The ships were out and they were trying to get to port no matter what. Nowadays, if you go up into like the Straits of Mackinac area where I grew up, and I'll post a picture of that. This is the Straits of Mackinac, looking at it from the St. Ignace side on Lake Michigan, looking towards the Mackinac Bridge. And now I'm going up on the bridge. This is from one of my recent trips up there. That's Lake Michigan. It's a beautiful area, but she does get stormy. I came across this bridge one time, lightning coming down on each side. Scared me to death. The Straits of Mackinac, where I grew up, you'll see these ships in the lee of the islands that are there, in between Mackinac Island and what they call Boblo, but it's actually Boyd Blanc Island, and they take shelter. They don't go out in these storms anymore because these ships are susceptible, and there's one that's like 83 years old that's still sailing on the Great Lakes. So some of them aren't very new, and a freshwater ship lasts a lot longer. But let's get back to the Edmund Fitzgerald. So the Edmund Fitzgerald was the largest ship of its time, and it had one sister ship. Okay, the Fitz had set many records. She was when she was first made, she was what they call the Queen of the Lakes, which they always call a ship a she, but they're named men. That makes absolutely no sense to me. But that ship made many records hauling. The ship was designed differently than the Arthur Anderson that was following behind it. The Arthur Anderson was a ship that had basically individual compartments. The Fitz had basically one large compartment with all the little hatches on top of that. There were some permeable, I don't know, I don't think they were a wire mesh, but they might have been like a holed steel bulkheads in between in the design of the ship. So it was designed differently. It was designed to be fast. It was designed to be easy to empty, and it broke a lot of records. So the night of the day the Fitz sank, I was with my parents. I was roughly 9 years old, and I was with my parents in Mackinac City, Michigan. Well, in Mackinac City, Michigan, there's a huge breakwall. That breakwall juts out into the Straits of Mackinac and creates the harbor that's there for all the small craft. Now, my memory was that the waves and the wind were so fierce that day that the waves tops were, not the top of the wave, but the wave was breaking over top of the break wall, no problem. But actually there's a light on the end of that break wall that's quite a bit higher in there. And the break wall is probably, I'd say, 6 to 8 feet out of the water. And the light is probably another 20 feet on top of that. And the waves are going, breaking, when they hit the break wall, they were going over top of that. And so it was a fierce storm. The wind was blowing and howling. And it was just amazing, the strength of it. So being 9 years old, we go home and we're watching TV, right? Okay, in northern Michigan, at that time, you had like 4 channels. And so we're watching this thing, and it comes up and it says, the Edmund Fitzgerald, feared to be in distress, has not made where it's supposed to be. And so they start playing this on the TV. And so I remember being upset about it. And as a child, one of my childhood dreams was to actually be a sailor on the Great Lakes. And that was something that I really wanted to do. But I grew up, in the Straits. The ships are going by every day. They're coming to the Straits of Mackinac is the confluence between Lake Huron and Lake Michigan. So when they're on one side of the Mackinac Bridge, they're in Lake Huron. When they're on the other side, they're in Lake Michigan. And there used to be a big old railroad car ferry that used to travel across there. And before the bridge was there was car ferries that used to travel across the straits. And that's how you got from the lower peninsula to the upper peninsula. But that storm was a massive storm. And it was probably, in my lifetime, one of the worst I ever seen up there. And, it's something that we think as men, we build things strong and that things are, the Titanic was unsinkable, right? Well, the Fitz they thought was kind of unsinkable. Well, that's not the truth. The truth is nature can overpower. So you have this ship in distress. They don't know where its ports. We lived just a little ways from a overlook that's up on a hill. So I don't know if I was so upset about it that I said something to my parents, and they took me up to that lookout, and I'd look out over the water to see if I could see the Fitz, if it made it, Well, it's kind of futile because it had to come down through the locks and everything, but the ship was gone. It was disappeared. A few years later, not even a few years, a little while later, some pictures appeared in the newspaper. And the pictures were of the lifeboat, I think a life ring and some other debris that they found. But the lifeboat itself, which is on display at the SS Valley Camp Museum in Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan, the lifeboat looks like it was partially torn in half. So whatever happened when that thing come loose, it was violent. The ship disappeared. The next thing I go about, we didn't get the newspaper. My parents never subscribed to the newspaper, but we went to the laundromat. And on the soda machine, and the pop machine, we call it in Michigan, the soda machine, there was a piece of a newspaper page about the Fitz, and it had the first ROV pictures of it. And the one that I remember sticking out in my mind, well, there's two actually. One of the stern being flipped upside down, and two of the front part of the ship with the brow that covers the windows just caved down and just all the glass gone and just bad, Nobody ever showed any bodies from the Fitz. I've never seen any footage with that. But the Navy said that, they thought she broke in half on the surface. Now, there's a reason for that, okay? The Daniel J. Morrell in Lake Huron broke in half. The bow sank and the stern actually went around for a while. Well, the design of that ship was different than the Fitz, okay? That was another compartmentalized ship where it had actually the loading holds were compartmentalized. But she fatigued and she broke in half. A few years later, the Carl Bradley sank off of Gull Island in Lake Michigan. it split in half. The ship just ripped right in half, okay? So you have that story there, and you have the story of, the designs of the ship. But so this was the immediate thing, is that, it might have grounded out on Caribou Shoal, and it got out there and it just split in half. That's not the damage you really see on the front. If it was to split in half, those halves are going to settle, and they're not necessarily going to be a lot of force going downward. As I got a bit older, I started seeing interviews, and one of the interviews was with Captain Bernie Cooper of the Arthur Anderson. By this time in my life, I was living in Rogers City, Michigan, which is where calcite, which is like the largest limestone quarry I think in the world, but it's huge. And my mother's second husband actually worked in the place. And we would go, the quarry was so large, we would go down in there and fish on the rivers in the fall. So they had the U.S. Steel fleet that sailed out of there. That was their Greyhound. They call them the Greyhounds because they were actually gray at the time. Now, if you ever see a Greyhound, they are red, they have a black stripe, and then they have the gray slant on it. That's one of the original ships that was the Greyhound that sailed out of calcite. So the ships are always in my life. I mean, this is something that I grew up with. And Bernie Cooper, who was the captain of the Anderson, which was 9 miles behind, in one of the interviews, he says, we were going along. He says, the waves are breaking over my deck of the ship, and they were higher than the hatch crane. The hatch crane is 12 feet above the deck of the ship. So you have the lee of the ship, what's sticking out, the loaded part, which is the sideboard, is sticking up out of the water. Then you have 12 foot of that crane, and the waves are coming over that. And then he said, a little while prior, before the Fitz disappeared, they had 2 waves come up from the rear in rapid succession that were 35 feet plus tall. He'd already talked to McSorley, Captain McSorley, and they said that he had his deck wire was down, they'd lost their radars, and they were taking on water. They had a list, but they were holding their own, okay? So their pumps are running, the ship's taking on water. It has this hold in it that has just these barriers, hold barriers. So if you have, and you kind of have to think about this, if you have taconite, which is little balls, and it's getting soaked with water, that means the friction that holds that stuff steady in the hold is less, because water basically mixed with anything, between 2 surfaces is a lubricant. And so Cooper said, and I believe this is what happened. This is my opinion, okay? Cooper said those 35 foot waves, 2 of them in quick succession, if they caught up with the Fitz and hit her from behind, that her bow would go down and she would not recover. And she basically drove herself into the bottom with her own screw propellers. The momentum of one of these ships that are loaded like that. So you got, Mr. Lightfoot, loaded with iron ore, 26,000 tons more than the Edmund Fitzgerald weighed empty. Well, 26,000 tons is a lot of weight. And if it's where it can slosh inside that ship, plus the water, it's going to go right through those perforated barriers, and it makes logical sense. So Bernie says this about it. He believed, though, that they did hit Caribou Shoals, that they bottomed out. He said that a ship, when it's loaded, it'll either heave or hog. And he thinks that when they hit Caribou Shoals, it went up like that and it snapped those deck wires. He says that's the only way that they would snap. So he's given his play-by-play as a captain of a long time ship that sailed many, many trips, many trips. And it's still, I think it's important now, or laid up now, but the Anderson sailed for a lot of years. One of the things that you have to realize, these guys don't say things that they don't think happen, And he was the one, other than a foreign freighter, he was the one that was closest to the Fitz. And there was only one other ship that really had contact with the Fitz at this time. But they were 9 miles out, those waves came by, and then the Fitz disappeared. And so what he says is that he thinks it drove the nose down, the taconite and the water rushed to the front. Those guys didn't stand a chance. They didn't stand a chance. But here we are. I'm it's 50 years. So if I was roughly 9, it's 59, almost 60 years. And this is something that is still being talked about today. And I just wanted to take some time and share with you guys, because a lot of people in northern Michigan have a story. And the kids of that generation were affected. I'll share this with you too. My buddy went to a tavern one time, and he sang, there's a song by REO Speedwagon called Riding the Storm Out. He sang that song, and then they played the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald. And this particular tavern was in Rogers City, Michigan. Rogers City, Michigan guys, they lost to Cedarville, they lost to Bradley, and basically the town is pretty small, so they lost almost a generation of fathers that were sailing on these two ships. And so the guys are a little sensitive, and it did not go over well. And to my knowledge, he never ever played those in a gig ever again, his band. But, we went from these canoes to the biggest iron ore freighter to ever sink. And it's a story. So take it easy, guys. I figured I'd just spend some time yakking at you about the Fitzgerald. I'm going to post a couple photos, images in this, and just to remind you. But just remember, the good ship and true is a bone to be chewed when the gales of November come early. And the lake, it is said, never gives up her dead. And that's because the water is so cold. You can swim in Lake Superior in August and you turn blue. Take it easy.